Let me start by thanking the team of talented ADL professionals who labored long and hard to put together this really remarkable event. I want to thank our national chairman, Marvin Nathan, and all the members of ADL's National Commission who are here today and whose support long has been essential to our success. I want to recognize my predecessor, Abe Foxman, our National Director Emeritus, who's with us today. And I'd like to give a special shout out to Phil Rubin, a member of our Atlanta Regional Board, and his team of volunteers who helped put together this conference. Let me thank all of you as well who are here with us, willing to open yourselves up to what should be a very exciting day today. Now, it may come as a surprise, but in our 100-year history, ADL has never before convened a summit quite like this. This is a first. I suppose in our early days, it was because anti-Semitism was just a given. It's the reason why ADL was founded. And more recently, while anti-Semitism has been present under the surface of society, it was more like a persistent or nagging ache, a condition that you learned to live with and just tried to keep under control. We were vigilant, we monitored it, we spoke out against it, we fought back. But by and large, America and American life have been remarkably tolerant and welcoming to the Jewish people. The Jewish community lives here in this country with historic privilege and has achieved unprecedented success. And yet today, I think all of us fear that something has changed. There are troubling signs. Now, they may be subtle. They may go unnoticed by the vast majority of Americans, but we see them. We know. First, over the past few years, we've seen the growth of ugly campaigns on our college campuses. Efforts that seek to delegitimize the Jewish state and reduce Israel to some kind of taboo. This virus has spread and has made some of our greatest universities hostile to Jewish students, to pro-Israel advocates and those who support them. I could tell you stories right here about Stanford, Tufts, Columbia, Wesleyan, Hunter College, and so many others. At UCLA, a university where I taught for 8 years, the head of the Graduate Student Association, a young man who's not even Jewish, transferred to finish his law degree here in New York, rather than continue in Westwood to deal with the anti-Semitic and anti-Israel groups harassing him. And while many in this room might make the case for criminal justice reform and aspire to address racial inequities, all of us noted when some of the organizers of the Black Lives Matter movement this summer crafted a platform that singled out and slandered just one country in the world: Israel. This demonization caught many by surprise, but seemed to resurrect the rifts between the African American and Jewish communities that ADL and so many others have worked so hard and so long to repair. And then, of course, there's what we have seen this election season. Because it's rolled on for so long, I think it's hard to remember just how unique this election was. And not just because of the candidates themselves. The harassment and hate that bubbled up around the campaigns was unlike anything we've seen in recent history. This was an election where a presidential candidate criticized Israel in a manner that evoked a blood libel, where another unapologetically tweeted a Star of David meme that had been created by white supremacists. It promoted a campaign slogan that evoked the phrase most associated with the notorious Nazi sympathizer Charles Lindbergh, and sponsored a closing television ad that echoed anti-Semitic conspiracies that had been used to justify anti-Jewish persecution for centuries. During this political season, we saw white supremacists use a triple parenthesis to target Jews online and simultaneously and relentlessly harass and intimidate journalists on social media with anti-Semitic tropes and horrific images of the Holocaust. These were conservative journalists. These were liberal journalists. These were print journalists. These were broadcast journalists. These were reporters. These were opinion writers. These were bloggers. These were mainstream media. They all had one thing in common. They were Jews. In short, the American Jewish community, our community, has not seen this level of anti-Semitism in mainstream political and public discourse since the 1930s. Sadly, it is only being matched with escalating levels of hate toward other minorities too, including Latinos, the disabled, Muslims, African Americans, and too often the LGBT community. In the days since the election, literally just over a week ago, reports of possible hate crimes such as physical attacks, vandalism, harassment have flooded ADL's local offices and streamed into the news. There has been a litany of incidents, and I am only going to share a few of them because time won't allow me to tell you them all. A black doll hanging from a rope in an elevator of a freshman dorm in Buffalo. Anti-gay threats left on the windshield of a car in North Carolina, or the hood of my former intern in Texas. Taunts at Latino students of Build the Wall at a middle school in Michigan. A young Muslim woman assaulted and her hijab yanked off her head on a street in San Diego. And yes, make no mistake, anti-Semitism has continued to proliferate as well. According to statistics released just this past Monday by the FBI, Jews suffer from hate crimes at a rate of more than twice that of any religion in the country. This week has been no exception. We've seen swastikas scrawled on a Philadelphia storefront, on a Jewish cemetery in New York, and in a public school in Maryland. Those Jewish journalists who were first harassed and terrorized online are now coming home to find mailings in their mailbox of harassment and threat from those same white supremacists. And the chief curator of a website that hosted many of the most hateful ideas of this so-called alt-right has now been appointed to a high post in government. What's the sum total of all these signs? People are afraid. I know it. I hear from them. They worry about their children. Many are asking themselves, are we safe? Well, we as a people invented the phrase, never again. So let me just say here this morning, never is now. We must not be silent. We must raise our voices. We must act, and to act, we must understand what we are up against. We need to wrap our heads around the threats from the radical left that seek to delegitimize Jewish peoplehood and an extreme right that is embracing white nationalism and other racialist ideas that are hostile to American values and anti-Semitic at their core. We need to understand how technology is spreading these hatreds and becoming a weapon that threatens all of our communities. And that's what we're going to do here today. We've assembled an amazing lineup. There are activists and academics, executives and entrepreneurs, more than 1,000 people who will be here to listen, to learn, to take stock, and take action. I expect today will stimulate debate. You might agree with much of what you hear. You might disagree with even more. These ideas are intended to explore new angles to address this age-old issue. It is intended to get you thinking. It is intended to inspire all of us to action. More than 100 years ago, the founders of ADL came together in dark days, at a time when American Jews were not able, and keep this in mind, we were not able to live, to work, or to learn anywhere that we wanted. It was a time when anti-Semitism was acceptable in public society, when a Jewish man could be lynched by a mob rather than tried by the law. Yes, there were days that were much darker here in this country than they are today. And at that most difficult moment, the founders of ADL said that we, American Jews, a group that lacked power, a group that had no real standing, whose future in this country was shaky and uncertain, they envisioned, the founders of ADL, that we would exert our power for good to stop the defamation of the Jewish people, even as we would stand up and pursue equal justice for all. Now more than ever, we need to honor that mission. We need to speak out when we see anti-Semitism and bigotry, no matter the source. Whether it's a publicly traded company or a high-ranking public official, whether it's what you hear from a progressive street protester or a conservative radio host, no one has an excuse for excusing intolerance. We need to educate where we can, oppose where we must, and lock arms with those who embrace our mission. And we must stand with our fellow Americans who may be singled out for how they look, where they're from, who they love, or how they pray. And let me say this. There have recently been reports that the new administration plans to force Muslim Americans to register for some sort of master government list. Look, it is safe to say that radical jihadism, it's a threat to us all. But as Jews, we know what it means to be registered and targeted, held out as different from our fellow citizens. We, as Jews, know the righteous and just response. All of us have heard the story of the Danish king who said, if his country's Jews had to wear a gold star, all of Denmark would too. So I pledge to you right here and now, because I am committed to the fight against anti-Semitism, that if one day in these United States, if one day Muslim Americans will be forced to register their identities, then that is the day this proud Jew will register as a Muslim. And let me tell you why. Because fighting prejudice against the marginalized is not just the fight of those minorities. It's our fight. Just as the fight against anti-Semitism isn't only our fight, it's everyone's fight. That is the cause that ADL signed up for when we were founded over a century ago. Will we make enemies? No doubt. Just like we made enemies when we took on the KKK in the 1930s. Just like we made enemies when we took on Joe McCarthy in the 1950s. Just like we made enemies when we marched for Soviet Jewry in the 1970s. But make no mistake, making powerful enemies is the price one sometimes must pay when speaking truth to those to power. Now, it won't be easy. It may be extremely difficult at times. There will be those in our country, even those in our own community, who disagree, sometimes strongly. But I welcome their disagreement. I look forward to the debate because I know that our mission commands us to do this work. We know why ADL was created, and it was founded for moments just like this. And so I pledge to you today that I will do everything in my power. I will work as hard as I can with each and every one of you so that ADL meets this moment, defends the Jewish people, and fights for justice and fair treatment to all. Now, if you'll allow me, there are two special guests who wanted to be here but couldn't make the trip. First, I'd like to read excerpts from a letter that came in the other day from the President of Israel, Ruvi Rivlin, who wanted to be here but again couldn't. And he writes, "Dear friends, as you gather together in New York to engage in dialogue on ways to combat the threats posed by anti-Semitism in our time, I would like to express to all of you our deep admiration for your invaluable efforts to protect and safeguard the Jewish people. In addition to the evils experienced by members of our nation over the centuries, this current era has seen additional pathways of attack and injury against us. The work of the Anti-Defamation League, which seeks to combat such attempts, is vitally important and of immense value to all of us here in Israel. The letter from Ruby Rivlin will be available on our website. And now, please allow me to turn our attention to the screens to my left and to my right, where we will hear a message from another special guest. Many of you, like me, may remember marching in the streets in our youth or writing letters to Congress to free prisoners of conscience like Natan Sharansky, individuals who were imprisoned in the former Soviet Union because of their Jewish faith. Today, Mr. Sharansky is no longer a refusnik, but a revered hero in the Jewish state of Israel and around the world. And we are fortunate that today he will help us to open Never Is Now.
Dear friends, welcome. ADL has such a great history and has such an important work. And I go back with ADL to 1974 to Moscow, where I first met Abe Foxman, who was visiting us Jewish refuseniks, fighting for our right to live as Jews and to go to Israel. And looking back, I think how simple then the life was, how everything was so clear for me and for Abe and for everybody, that here is the Soviet authorities, KGB, whose policy is extremely anti-Semitic. And here is the free world understanding us, supporting us, and helping us. Everything was black and white. Here were enemies, here were friends. How much more complicated the world is today. And here we see that nothing can be taken for granted, that anti-Semitism becomes stronger and stronger. The Jews feel themselves extremely uncomfortable, this time in Western Europe. For the first time in the history of Jewish agency, we are receiving more Jews running away, escaping, and coming to Israel from the Western Europe than from the Eastern Europe. And what is maybe the most alarming is the most important battleground against anti-Semitism and for the future of Jewish people is American university. So here is our challenge. Our challenge is not how to unmask the anti-Semitism of some extreme Islamists, and not how to unmask the anti-Semitism of extreme right-wing racists. It's obvious that we have to deal with it. But what to do with our own liberal world, where we always felt ourselves so comfortable, when there is so many accusations bordering with delegitimization of Israel, demonization of us as a people and of us as the state, and clear double standard applied to Israel. And as I say to our Israeli fellows and campuses, your aim is not to convince our enemies that we are good. Anti-Semitism will continue existing. Our aim should be to convince us, ourselves, Jewish people, that we have nothing to be embarrassed of our Jewishness and our connection with the state of Israel. Yes, we have to continue our struggle for human rights, for equality. We have continued to express our concern for tikkun olam, for seeing the world as a better place, but to remember that our success in the struggle for human values can be only if we are connected strongly to our past, to our community, to our values, to our people, and we are proud of this connection.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to JEM, To Jim, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.